The Hawks are now investigating 4 cases of treason against Afrikaner lobby groups Afriforum and Solidariteit over their alleged disinformation campaign. Now, this came during the week that the DA quietly sent a delegation to the White House in an effort to mend strained relations with South Africa. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court in the United States ordered that Donald Trump's administration promptly releases money owed to non-profit organizations and business partners of the U.S. Agency for International Development and the State Department for work completed. And after a visit from our first citizen and his cabinet, will Gauteng and the city of Joburg manage to put up a world-class showstopper when our G20 guests start making their way to our beautiful country? I'm Ziyanda Ngcobo, and this is your week in politics. Earlier this week, Donald Trump's administration paused military aid to Ukraine after the explosive bust-up with President Zelensky at the White House in full view of the media last Friday.
You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
On Tuesday, Newzroom Africa's Washington correspondent Simon Marks reported that officials within the Trump administration claimed the pause in aid was temporary, until they had some kind of assurance from President Volodymyr Zelensky that he was committed to the peace process with Russia.
It's very unclear what Volodymyr Zelensky has to do in order to persuade President Trump that he really wants to bring about an end to the Ukraine conflict. Because what Volodymyr Zelensky's position has been is that he's only going to sign away a significant chunk of his country's mineral wealth to the United States, as Donald Trump is demanding, if the Americans agree to underpin any peace negotiation and any peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia with American-backed security guarantees. That means military infrastructure by the United States being devoted to helping European and other peacekeepers on the ground make sure that this conflict doesn't flare up again.
But by Wednesday, the Supreme Court in the U.S. upheld the lower court's decision which compelled Trump to honor the payments to funders and recipients of grants from the U.S. Agency for International Development and the State Department for their past work. Trump had initially ordered a 90-day pause in mid-January, pending a review of all foreign aid programs which jeopardized delivery of life-saving food and medical aid. Advocacy group Global Citizen has criticized countries like the United States, Germany, France and other European countries for prioritizing defense budgets over life-saving aid. They warn that such short-sightedness could lead to a global crisis. The organization's co-founder, Michael Sheldrick, argues that when looking at the numbers, the money spent on international funding only amounts to around 1% of each country's overall fiscus, but the impact will be much larger with long-term consequences.
You're seeing far-reaching aid cuts, not limited to just the United States of America. Last week, the United Kingdom cut its entire aid program by 40% to fund defense spending. You've also seen the Netherlands, Belgium, France, and you will likely also see Germany, Norway, Sweden. Other countries also implement these far-reaching aid cuts. And the important thing to understand is these aid cuts will, yes, they will impact people's livelihoods. They will put lives at stake, but they will also turn back the clock on decades of development. You know, there are some statistics talking about, for instance, the impact this will have on HIV/AIDS treatment. You could have a situation in up to 230 babies are being born a day with HIV that could have been easily prevented.
Sheldrick adds that South Africa's G20 presidency is the perfect platform to catapult the continent to new heights where 800 million jobs can be created for the youth in Africa within the next decade. He says it can also create an opportunity to move from foreign aid being seen as a top-down approach, but rather a genuine two-way partnership.
Ramaphosa sees himself as a consensus builder, and right now he's inheriting the biggest stage in the world with the G20 platform. And I think it's an opportunity with the African Union having a seat around that to also showcase, hey, we're not just recipients of this aid dollars. This is what we bring to the global conversation. And I see what Africa brings through its youth around the world, through its potential, to supercharge many of the key issues we're talking about when it comes to technology, when it comes to the AI revolution. I've been told that in the next few decades, 1 in 4 people on the planet are going to be African. Where do you think the technology giants of the world will be getting their employees? It's on the continent as well.
Deputy Speaker.
Meanwhile, here at home, National Assembly Speaker Togo Didiza granted the EFF's request to debate U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to stop aid to South Africa and how to craft a response to this. Newzroom Afrika's Malungelo Boy followed those proceedings and filed this report.
During the debate on the issue, lawmakers differed on how South Africa should deal with the U.S. Julius Malema says there's only one reason America is acting in this way against South Africa.
The U.S. aggression towards South Africa is nothing more than Israel's revenge for our moral stance in support of Palestine.
Inkatha Freedom Party MP and Transport Deputy Minister Mkhuleko Hlengwa says South Africa must protect its sovereignty.
The global political landscape is shifting rapidly, and sovereign nations are making decisions that have far-reaching consequences. The United States, in exercising its own sovereign right, has halted aid funding to South Africa. In equal measure, South Africa must exercise its own sovereignty in responding to this decision in a manner that prioritizes our national interest.
The MK Party's Wesley Douglas called on the U.S. to reinstate its PEPFAR funding as a matter of urgency.
We call on the United States to immediately restore PEPFAR or to work on a phase-out process. We call for urgent negotiations on AGOA that will serve all South Africans, not just corporate elites here. We call on all America to respect South Africa's sovereignty on land reform, foreign policy, and economic self-determination. If the United States wants a strong economic and diplomatic relationship with South Africa, it must be built on respect, fairness, and genuine partnership, not threats, blackmail, or economic warfare.
While some parties argued that South Africa should strengthen relations with other countries, including China, PA leader and Sports Minister Gauteng Mackenzie says America remains an important partner to South Africa.
Let's fix our relationship. You talk about BRICS. Russia, rightly so. Russia jumped at the opportunity to restore the relationship with America. India was the first visit that happened, was India. Don't come here. The world is going right. You want to go this way. We need each other. So I want to say to South Africans, you can howl as much as you like. At the moment, we can't even give our doctors a job.
Rise Mzansi leader Songezo Zibi argued that President Cyril Ramaphosa should not meet up with US President Donald Trump, as Trump is likely to embarrass him.
Another week, another delegation from our country visiting officials in Donald Trump's administration. But unlike the fanfare made by Afriforum when they hopped on a plane for Washington, the Democratic Alliance silently entered the fray when it came to the diplomatic fallout with the United States. The party concluded a week-long visit to the White House in what it says was an effort to stabilize relations with South Africa and the White House. The organization also says the trip was to clarify and clear up any misconceptions when it comes to the country's policies. But what created even more questions is the inclusion of Deputy Minister for Trade and Industry Andrew Whitfield in the DA's delegation, and whether or not he alerted President Cyril Ramaphosa before leaving the country.
Was it too urgent for the Democratic Alliance that you couldn't wait out for the president to set up that special envoy? As you say that it will be, well, the expectation is that it would be a multi-party envoy as well.
So I don't think that the two are mutually exclusive. We know that there are business delegations. We know that our South African ambassador to the US is currently also in discussions. And I think that creating sort of a situation where the two are mutually exclusive, or one is at the behest of the other or at the expense of the other, is somewhat intellectually dishonest. I think that all South Africans should be working to do what we can to continue to build and restore trust.
Spokesperson for International Minister Crispin Piri says it remains unclear whether the DA even met with key decision makers. But he has emphasized that the Trump administration has not filled important positions where those appointed officials would become interlocutors in foreign policy discussions. Piri gives examples of how the U.S. Trade Office, Bureau for Africa, and even the U.S. Embassy in South Africa are significant bodies that contribute in talks around mutual interest, but all these institutions are undergoing changes, making it difficult for a meaningful engagement until there is stability.
They went there on their own frolic, and that's that. And whatever they have achieved cannot be claimed to be on behalf of the Republic. The minister himself has been to Washington. A number of other delegations sent by the authority of the president have been to Washington previously to engage on various aspects with various interlocutors on South Africa's foreign policy and also on South Africa's trade policy. So this idea that we now have a government of national unity, therefore even political parties can represent the government, I think is a misnomer. The DA is a non-state actor and their actions should not be construed as that of the Republic.
In his weekly column, City Press editor Mondli Makhanya has argued that the actions of Afriforum and Solidariteit are reviving the Volkstaat ideology, which was a cultural and political movement that sought to protect the interests of Afrikaners within their own state. Makhanya says the reason for the resuscitation of this thinking is that the extremists have found a sympathetic ear in Donald Trump.
I think the core of people who wanted it have now coalesced around Afriforum and Solidariteit. And I think, in those organizations, one can state quite frankly, they're not just conservative, they're actually openly racist, and they want an enclave that only belongs to Afrikaners. And they've become extremely powerful. Afriforum is very, very powerful. They do a lot of quality work in terms of doing charity in the Afrikaans community mainly. They help, they do lobbying on behalf of the language, and they defend people in court, etc., etc. So they've developed a lot of legitimacy in the Afrikaans community. And now they have used that legitimacy and power to put this issue of the Volkstaat on the table.
Meanwhile, former opposition leader Tony Leon believes that the government reneged on its past promises, which might explain why there's a resurgence of these extremist elements. As someone who was part of the negotiation process for our democracy, and having explained, how it took a lot of discussion and concessions to actually get the 1994 elections to go ahead, why do you believe then, 31 years into our democracy, that there's still a section within the Afrikaner community that is not buying into the ideals of a rainbow nation or what was later termed unity and diversity?
Because I think those are very noble and just concepts, but I think they're very often honored in their breach. So it's one thing to say, well, buy into it. And then they say, well, hang on, we're a minority and we're in a situation or in a polity where the majority rules on everything. And if you're a minority voice, well, it just gets ignored. I guess that would be the response to that. So I think that there's the idea of a constitutional democratic South Africa, which is very important, and so I voted in favor of the Constitution back in 1996 on the 8th of May in Parliament. And then there's reality, because the reality of South Africa is that we often do things that dishonor those constitutional promises. And I'm not just confining this to the subject we're talking about. We can give you a long laundry list, from socioeconomic rights to language rights to rights to personal safety, which are completely honored only by their breach, as we know, as the reality of South Africa has proven, unfortunately. So I think if you come from a community which is a minority, even if you've got quite a lot of economic How? Because of the old South Africa. And you say, well, hang on, I was promised, mother tongue education as a reality. I was assured that we'd at least be taken seriously on this self-identity thing, and it's never actually happened. You might have a sense of alienation.
Coming up after the break, I'll take you through some of the highlights of the visit by President Cyril Ramaphosa to Gauteng and Johannesburg. Our first citizen clearly doesn't want to be embarrassed when he hosts world leaders from across the globe this year. I'll also tell you a little bit about the work of the ANC provincial task teams in KZN and Gauteng and what they've been up to. Plus, the AmaZulu King hosted our land reform minister after a bitter fallout last month. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. Thanks for staying tuned to Newzroom Afrika on channel 405. This week, President Cyril Ramaphosa and his cabinet paid a visit to the Gauteng Executive and the Johannesburg Council in an effort to deal with service delivery issues. It's quite remarkable that in a week where the ANC provincial task teams in KZN and Gauteng talk tough on bringing back the dignity of the organization is the same time that its deployee in Joburg, Dada Morero, basically told residents of his metro that the fixing of issues such as potholes and broken traffic lights will be prioritized for our G20 guests who will apparently have their own routes for the duration of their stay. So this begs the question, does the left hand truly know what the right hand is doing?
Indeed, we are doing our level best. We've prioritized certain routes within Johannesburg, which are G20 routes, to ensure that at least we can make them to be at the standard at which they should be. No potholes, no crisis or traffic signals that are not working. So we are focusing on that. But we are generally focusing on the infrastructure issue, including the water infrastructure.
This was Morero speaking at the Urban 20 gathering, where the mayors of Tshwane and Johannesburg assumed the chairmanship of the body on Monday. The U20 is recognized as a formal G20 engagement group for cities. But by Thursday and Friday, when President Cyril Ramaphosa and his executive descended upon the Gauteng Executive and Morero's council, the tune around service delivery was poles apart.
The observance of Human Rights Month is particularly relevant in the context of our discussions today. The right to water, the right to sanitation, to healthcare, to housing, to education, all these are fundamental to the well-being of our communities. And they are well located amongst the G13 issues that the Premier articulated.
Ramaphosa believes there is immense opportunity for the city of Johannesburg to showcase its wonders and beauty. Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi has admitted that they need help in protecting the province and the city's bulk infrastructure. He says that Johannesburg has been under constant threats from various issues, including zamazamas, theft and vandalism.
The challenge of bulk infrastructure, for example, for the entire province, we can't solve it alone. Literally, our bulk infrastructure is seriously under attack. Organized syndicate, those that are zamazamas, and institutions that we really believe that they're targeting this infrastructure to portray as if this government has failed. So we need firepower from authorities and those that can assist us. And for us to agree to it was indeed heartwarming.
On Monday, the cabinet released a statement updating the nation about the progress that's been made by the executive when it comes to finalizing the 2025 budget, which is due to be tabled next Wednesday by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. After convening a special meeting, a committee that is being led by Deputy President Paul Mashatile ultimately mandated Godongwana to deliver a spreadsheet that considers the financial constraints of the country, supporting economic growth and mitigating the impact on the poor and middle-income households. One economist believes it was amateurish for the National Treasury to not have already considered these factors in the 18 months they had to prepare the budget.
What we learned subsequently is that this is how the National Treasury has rolled for the past decade and longer. They don't even inform their own members of cabinet of their own parties. It shows a disdain for their own party, the ANC. And I just think it's a really unacceptable, and it shows the arrogance that they arrived at Parliament on the day. Only a few people knew what is going to happen. That is it's counter to transparent policy making, because what you're supposed to do if you're going to have a VAT increase, you're supposed to signal to the nation in the medium-term budget, or preferably a year before, these are our plans, and we have a discussion as South Africans as to what we can do. At the latest it should happen, they should signal it ahead of time, and I think this was just completely wrong. It was amateurish, it was incompetent by National Treasury.
The ANC's reconfigured provincial task teams in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng have hit the ground running after being officially appointed by the National Working Committee last week. The convener for the party in KZN, Jeff Radebe, held back no punches when he admitted that the arrogance of elected officials, whether in government or just within the organization, is what caused the dramatic electoral decline in the 2024 polls.
17% is a disaster. It reflects that the arrogance of the ANC has cost us the vote. I and my colleagues, we come with a fresh perspective that we want to start from ground zero to move brick by brick, root and branch, to ensure that all the mistakes that the ANC has done previously are corrected timelessly, and that we get back to where we are supposed to be. There are no holy cows here.
At the same time in Gauteng, the coordinator, Hope Bapo, has given his assessment on what needs to be done to rebuild the provincial structure.
Our organization was weakened over time because we were not paying attention to some of the basic things about an organization. For example, we're supposed to build sub-branches in our own localities at the VD voting district level. We did not do that. We were supposed to implement induction and political education. We did it, but not at the massive scale which we were supposed to have done it. We should have better monitored performance of local government and provincial government, and also the programs of national government in our province. We were not effective in doing that. So it's not only organizational. Part of our responsibility is not to interfere in government, but closely monitor the implementation of commitments which were made in the manifesto.
Political analyst Lukhona Mnguni says President Cyril Ramaphosa seems to have a much firmer grip on the ANC than he did when he took the helm of the party after the 2017 Nasrec conference. This comes after Secretary General Fikile Mbalula rejigged the chairpersons of subcommittees within the organization and placed Ramaphosa's allies in those positions.
The question is whether or not between the SG now, Fikile Mbalula, and the President Ramaphosa, there's enough alignment and that they are actually doing these things together. I mean, just as a reminder, you'll remember the controversial appointment of the spokesperson in Pulemabe, which seemingly took everybody by surprise because the SG was really undertaking that process. Is President Ramaphosa at a stronger point within the ANC? I think so, because I mean, to an extent, the ANC does know that largely their fate lies with his leadership in government. And I think there's enough mandate for him, even across the globe with the G20 and all of those things. So there's a bit of an opportune moment for him to drive the party.
With the ANC expected to hold its National General Council sometime this year, which is a midterm review of policy implementation, Mnguni is not convinced that the party would survive hosting such a gathering in its current state.
I don't see a National General Council taking place. One, the ANC is broke. Secondly, its structures are extremely dysfunctional, which is partly the mandate that has been given to these two big provinces. So who do you actually General Council with? And thirdly, the president's diary is just exceedingly busy with the G20 and all the other global commitments. By now, if the NGC was to take place, which usually, I mean, okay, 2010 was in September, the previous one before that was in June, July. There should be a date, there should be a venue, there should be a sense of delegates. You need to go through an entire branch auditing system and so on. I just don't think that the ANC organizationally is ready for a National General Council.
On Tuesday, Land Reform Minister Ziyanda Ngcobo headed to the Kwakhangela Mankengane Royal Palace to meet with AmaZulu King Misuzulu Kazwelithini over the issues surrounding the Ingonyama Trust. Ngcobo and the monarch have been at loggerheads over the board which oversees the nearly 3 million hectares of land belonging to the AmaZulu nation. A 12-member committee, which includes royal family members, legal and Zulu cultural experts, is set to be established within a week to look into the issues surrounding the Ingonyama Trust.
No, the meeting went very well. We're very delighted where we are because the king gave us an instruction and we are going to carry out that instruction. And the instruction is very clear that I must establish a committee of 12 people to investigate matters of Ingonyama Trust Board. And I've made a commitment to the king that that structure will be established within 7 days so that we establish and get to the bottom of what is really happening with Ingonyama Trust Board.
The monarch's guests arrived bearing gifts in an effort to smoke the peace pipe. That's all I have time for this week, but there's plenty on the go over the coming days, including the tabling, hopefully, of our budget by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. President Cyril Ramaphosa is also expected to lead the SA European Council Summit on Thursday. I'll be part of the team on the ground, bringing all the live events, analysis, and breaking news from Cape Town. For now, it's goodbye, and thank you for watching.